world as the way that they get their needs met. And you coming from a substance abuse background, recovery is second nature to you folks. One of our members was having a discussion with Dave Spencer, and there was a mental health person talking about issues around maintaining people who are mentally ill. And the notion of recovery was a new and foreign subject for this mental health person. And Dave said, we've been doing it for years. And substance abuse is way ahead of mental health in terms of the notion of how you describe recovery. A lot of folks in mental health say recovery is staying out of the hospital and taking your meds and being a good doobie and cleaning your room and doing your chores and things of that nature, when that's only, that's the beginning of the process. It's not the end result.
Correct. That's the beginning.
Right.
And that really sells people short if you think that's the
end all.
If that's the end all.
Right.
The positive is, as you said, several years ago, it was a foreign discussion to a lot of people. But more and more people have begun to understand what we're talking about and what our mission is. And there will be times when perhaps people slip, and that's an old term from substance abuse, but there are times when perhaps people need to come back and receive some level of support. But that's no different than individuals who may finally go out and, after going through supported employment and having a job coach and finally getting a job in which they don't need support, well, given this economy, they might lose that job. They might get laid off. And that might be a difficult process again for them, just as anyone who's unemployed goes someplace to get some type of job training or support. They may have to come back into the behavioral health system to retool again, to receive that kind of support. And years ago, people thought that was a failure because they didn't understand how much hard work they had done to get to where they're at. And that's probably the other message that we need to make sure we give to people. Agencies used to think, and support staff used to think, that they were doing the work. So the clients thought they were doing the work, not themselves. So if they succeeded, they thought the staff had done it for them. And if they failed or they slipped, they thought that they had to go back all over again. I'm a failure. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And what really hit home to me, it was back when I was at Kodak, actually. We had a celebration similar to some of the recovery celebrations that we now do. And I had a young man come up to me who had done really well in treatment. And he was actually helping us. His love was music. And that's another story we should probably talk about, because we need to build on people's strengths, not look at their weaknesses.
Exactly.
And that's what a disability says.
Right.
You're disabled in some way. You have a failure, which is why I'm saying we need to maybe do away with some of those terms
More
also.
like different abilities.
Right. And this person was really great in music. So he would put together these tapes for us. And I know you love music. So that when we had different celebrations during the holiday season, at the end of the year, this happened to be for Halloween, which is appropriate as we're sitting here filming this. So he put together some music for us. So I was thanking him. And he said to me, Craig, it's been 5 years that I'm in recovery, and I really want to thank you. And I stopped him and I said, you really shouldn't be thanking me, because you did all the hard work. We're there to assist you. And the reason why I used to really love my job was that I used to say that the clients would allow us to go on their journey to recovery. It's a beautiful journey. It has its ups and downs. But at the end of the day, the success stories used to make my job a really great job. And one of the reasons why I love going out is that it reminds me of those days. And I went back to the staff and I said, I was a little disappointed that when I said that to this individual, he sort of looked at me as if he didn't quite understand what I was saying when I said, you've done all the hard work. So I wrote a column in our newsletter, and the column talked about the fact that we as a staff needed to do a better job of celebrating recovery and talking to our clients about how well they had done, not how well we had done.
Right.
So a year later, I go to the same celebration, and this gentleman's wife came up to me, and she said, I really want to thank you for that column in the newsletter that you wrote. I said, well, you don't really have to thank me. I was really kind of criticizing my own staff that we hadn't done enough. She said, no, you don't understand. I cut that article out and I put it up on our refrigerator because it's the first time that my husband's children had seen something positive, seen something good written about their father. Because all they had heard was their father was this and then their father was that,
Right.
rather than something positive. So that really stuck with me, that we need to do a better job of making sure when people come through our doors, we're talking about, number one, the strengths that they have, and number two, what is it that you need to get in order to be, quote unquote, in recovery. And I do broaden it because for years that was a foreign term in DD as well. And we're probably the only state that at our recovery rally, we had major support from several of the DD agencies. Because even though there isn't a cure, the way in which you live your life can be different.
Qualitatively.
Qualitatively.
Right.
So you may always be dealing with some issues connected to your developmental disability, but it doesn't mean that you have to be seen as being limited by that. And we've seen some great examples of people that go to programs that specialize in music and art, specialize in employment. We have really better examples in the DD world for employment services, companies that are managed and companies that hire people with disabilities, and they compete in the free market. They do landscaping. We have a shredding company. We have companies that run laundry services. We have horticultural programs. We have a long list of programs that you would never know that there were individuals working there that have a disability. And one of my hopes for next year, when the General Assembly comes back into session, is that our department will support legislation that will further the work that we're doing in both the employment area and in the housing area.
Okay. Now, speaking of the General Assembly, which smacks of budget, where are we this year in terms of our financial status for the agency, for the state?
Well, as you know, unfortunately, we have gone through a series of years in which we've been dealing with the recession and state budgets that have been severely limited when it comes to both state and federal dollars in some ways. One of the advantages that we've had in the past couple of years has been there has been an increase in some of the federal share in our budget, both due to the FMAP increase that was part of the stimulus bill, as well as some CNOMs, which cost not normally matchable in the Medicaid program under the global waiver. So we haven't seen as dramatic a series of cuts in either behavioral health or in DD as we have in some other states, if you look at some of our neighboring states. That's the good news. The bad news is we still have had cuts.
Right.
And even a status quo budget, given the fact that our caseload continues to increase, makes that cut even more difficult. Because of the recession, as you know, we've seen a increased demand at our mental health centers and our behavioral health centers for services, because with stress, with trauma, brings a demand for mental health services. When people lose their jobs suddenly, when they're constantly undergoing the stress due to limited resources, a family becomes homeless. Those are all the triggers for some degree of stress that may accentuate the fact that there was some underlying disabilities there to begin with. So we are trying to really look at all of our systems and transform them using the issue that I talked about previously, the right time and the right place and the right amount. We don't have the luxury, perhaps, of providing people with a level of service regardless of where they come into the system. You mentioned people used to come in, if they came into an inpatient setting, they would get inpatient services. If they came into an outpatient setting, they would get an extended period of outpatient services. If they came into one area, the assessment always said, oh yes, this is where you belong. And we had agencies providing a different business model, so to speak, not based upon what an individual needs, but really based upon what their specialty.
Right, this is what we do here. So
this is what we do here.
Love it or leave it.
This is the way we're comfortable doing it. This is the way our billing system is set up.
Right.
So we've been changing that as a way to modify the cut in the budget without it affecting the individual as much as it might be. Now, I'm not going to be naive enough to say that it hasn't affected the delivery system somewhat, and it hasn't affected individuals somewhat. But we've been trying to modify how much it really affects people, and I think we've been somewhat successful. The real work is still being done. I hope that in both DD and in behavioral health, that by the end of this fiscal year, next July, that we will have completed this series of modifications, and that we'll have a bit of a stable base. And hopefully we're beginning to see some numbers improve at both the state and the national level, that the state budget perhaps will become stable at least, so that we won't have another series of dramatic budget cuts. I came to the state in January of 2000, and I came thinking, after I turned it down twice, that I was coming during a time that we would continue to build services and that we would continue to develop new programs. And actually, it's been 10 years now of budget target reductions. Some years it was 0, some years it was -2, -5, -10. So hopefully we'll put that behind us, and we'll begin to at least become stable, and maybe in the next couple of years begin to see at least some caseload growth and some growth in the budget as well. So it's difficult, it's tight, but Rhode Island has never turned its back on people with disabilities. We haven't gone to waiting lists. We haven't frozen admissions as they have in some other states. Fortunately, we closed down our institutions many years ago. Unfortunately, those dollars have already been spent. If you look at some other states, the way in which they're dealing with the budget crisis is we'll close another hospital. We don't have any other institutions to close, and that's good. And we are moving, I think, towards the next generation of supports beyond what was the series of supports that we developed when we closed LAD and when we closed IMH. We don't want to go backwards. We don't want to expand the hospital. We don't want to go back to even mini institutions. We want to do more to provide supports for people in their own homes, and maybe put off the onset of either a group home, assisted living, shared living, because it's, number one, it's cheaper, and number two, it's a better quality of life.
If people are living in the sort of scattered site housing within the state, that's a lot more cost effective than to develop a supervised apartment program or a group home. So it's more natural, normal living environments are what are needed.
And we're trying to encourage movement within that system as well, because even though we have a number of different models, I'm still concerned that once you get into one of those, whether it's a supervised apartment or a group home, people become comfortable, families feel people are safe.
It's almost like a sentence.
It's almost like a sentence. And sometimes I say to families, have you considered other options? Because if your loved one is 30 years old or 25 years old, and they've done fairly well living at home, let's look at whether or not we need to intensify some of those supports rather than jumping to the next level. Because once you jump, it's difficult to go back.